I used to believe that if you worked hard enough, loyalty would take care of itself. That's what I told myself every morning when I unlocked the front door of the office before anyone else arrived. Same building, same sign, our family name in brushed metal above the glass. I helped put it there. If you've ever trusted the wrong people simply because you shared blood with them, you'll understand why this still sits heavy with me. And if stories like that resonate with you, stay with me. This one ends differently than they expected. My name is Daniel. The business started small. One warehouse, 2 delivery trucks, and my father's stubborn belief that family should always work together. I was the youngest, which meant I was the one expected to prove myself the most. I didn't complain. I learned every corner of the operation. Inventory, vendors, contracts. I stayed late so others could leave early. At first it felt good, like we were building something permanent, something that would outlast arguments and bad years. My older brother Thomas handled the public side, meetings, handshakes, smiles. My sister Rebecca took care of finances, at least on paper. I stayed in the background, fixing problems before they became visible. That role fit me, or so I thought. When my father's health began to fail, things shifted, slowly, quietly. Meetings happened without me. Decisions were made before I heard about them. When I asked questions, I was told not to worry. We've got it covered, they said. Focus on operations. I trusted them. That was my mistake. The building we worked out of wasn't just an office. It was the backbone of everything. Warehouse space, leased offices, long-term tenants upstairs. Years earlier, when my father refinanced to expand, he insisted my name go on the deed with his, not for control, for security. I didn't think about that much at the time. I wish I had. The first time I realized something was wrong, it didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came with silence. I walked into the office one Monday and found my access card didn't work. The receptionist looked uncomfortable, like she'd been waiting for that moment all morning. She told me there'd been a system update. I laughed it off and waited while she buzzed me in. Inside, my desk was gone. Not moved, gone. My things were boxed neatly and stacked in the storage room. No note, no explanation, just absence. Thomas avoided eye contact that day. Rebecca didn't come in at all. By the afternoon, I received an email calendar invite titled Family Meeting. No agenda, just a time in a conference room. I spent that night replaying every decision I'd made over the last decade, wondering where I'd gone wrong. I didn't sleep much. The meeting felt rehearsed. Their lawyer sat at the table before I arrived. Papers were already laid out, coffee cups placed exactly where they needed to be. They spoke in calm voices, careful words. They told me the company was moving in a new direction, that my role was no longer essential, that it was best for everyone if I accepted a buyout and stepped away quietly. They slid a folder toward me. Inside was a number that didn't come close to reflecting what I'd built. No shares, no property, no future involvement. I asked one question. When was this decided? They didn't answer directly. They didn't have to. As I sat there, nodding like I understood, something else clicked into place. Not anger, not panic. Memory. A late afternoon years ago. My father at the kitchen table. The deed papers spread out. Him saying, "Just in case, I want you protected." I closed the folder, and for the first time in that room, I wasn't the one being surprised. I didn't mention the deed in that meeting. Not yet. I thanked them for their time, told them I needed a few days to review the offer, and walked out with my box of things like a man who'd just been laid off from a job he barely mattered to. I let them believe that version of me. It made what came next possible. Outside, I sat in my car for almost an hour. Not crying, not angry, just breathing. Letting the shock drain out slowly so it wouldn't poison my decisions. I'd learned long ago that reacting too fast was how you lost leverage. That night, I pulled out the old documents. They were exactly where I remembered them. A faded folder tucked behind tax records and insurance papers. The deed. The refinance agreement. My name, clear and unmistakable, next to my father's. Joint ownership. No expiration. No conditions tied to employment. The building wasn't just where the business operated. It was the business. Over the next few days, I watched from a distance. Former employees stopped calling me. Vendors stopped replying. Someone had already told a story about why I was gone, and it wasn't flattering. I didn't correct it. Silence has a way of making people careless. I hired my own attorney. Quietly. No family connections. No overlap. I didn't say much. I just handed over the paperwork and asked one question. What happens if the majority owners of a company forget who owns the property they operate from? He smiled in a way that told me I wasn't imagining things. What followed wasn't dramatic. No confrontations, no raised voices, just paperwork moving through the right offices at the right pace. Notices, requests, clarifications, all perfectly legal, all impossible to ignore. Thomas called me first. He sounded confused, then irritated. He asked why I'd contacted the property management firm, why tenants were asking questions, why their lawyer had flagged an issue with the building's ownership structure. I told him the truth, calmly. I still own half. There was a pause, a long one. Rebecca called next. Her tone was sharper. She said I was being difficult, that I was trying to sabotage the company out of spite, that Dad would have hated this. That part hurt more than I expected. I reminded her of the afternoon Dad signed those papers, how she'd been too busy to come over, how he'd insisted on my name being there because, in his words, I was the one who stayed. She didn't argue, she couldn't. The next family meeting was very different from the first. This time they asked me to come. This time there was no buyout folder waiting, just tension thick enough to taste. The same lawyer sat there, but his posture had changed. He looked cautious now. They tried negotiation first, offered a better number, shares, a consultant role, language about healing and moving forward together. I listened. I let them talk themselves tired. Then I told them what I wanted. I didn't want my job back. I didn't want a title. I didn't even want an apology, because apologies given under pressure don't mean anything. I wanted control of the building. Their faces told me everything before they spoke. That building had always been background to them, a line item, a tool. They'd underestimated how much power came with owning the ground beneath their feet. Without it, leases could change. Financing could shift. Expansion plans could stall overnight. I didn't threaten. I didn't raise my voice. I just explained. The meeting ended without resolution. They needed time, they said. I told them to take it. A week later, their attorney reached out again. This time, he asked what it would take to make things smooth. I asked for the deed to be transferred fully into my name, with a long-term lease back to the company at market rates. No favors, no discounts, clean and documented. It took them another week to agree. When the papers were signed, I felt something unexpected, not triumph, relief. I wasn't winning against them. I was finally stepping out of their shadow. The company stayed in business. They kept the name, the staff, the image. But every month, a payment landed in my account, steady, predictable, independent of their approval. They stopped calling after that. Family dinners became quiet affairs, sometimes awkward, sometimes skipped entirely. I didn't push, I didn't gloat. I let the distance speak for itself. What they never admitted, and what I never said out loud, was that they'd made the same mistake my father never did. They confused control with ownership. I drive past that building sometimes. The sign is still there, same brushed metal letters, same family name. Most people would assume nothing has changed. But I know better. And so do they. The company paid. They had to. Then came the lender issue. I received a formal inquiry about the building's financing structure. They wanted confirmation of ownership, updated documentation, proof of lease stability, standard due diligence, but again, the timing lined up too neatly with everything else. I answered every question, provided every document, my name, my signature, clear as day. The inquiry closed. Thomas showed up at my door that weekend. He looked older, not physically, something else, worn down at the edges. He didn't ask to come in. He stood on the porch like a guest who wasn't sure he was welcome. He said they were under review, that someone had raised concerns about operational control versus asset ownership, that lenders were nervous, that Rebecca was barely holding things together. He finally said the thing he'd avoided for over a year. We shouldn't have done it that way. I waited. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. He asked me what I wanted now. The question surprised me, not because it was asked, but because of how tired he sounded when he said it, like a man who'd finally realized he'd been fighting the wrong battle. I told him the truth. I wanted stability. For myself, for the building, for the people who still worked there. I didn't want to bleed the company dry. I didn't want revenge dressed up as justice. I wanted distance without destruction. He nodded, slowly. We talked for an hour. Not about contracts, about our father, about early mornings loading trucks, about arguments that felt enormous at the time and laughable now. The past didn't heal, but it softened enough to handle. Before he left, he asked if I'd ever come back, not as an employee, as something else. I told him no. Some doors close for a reason. After that, things stabilized. The company downsized, refocused, survived. The lease remained. The payments stayed steady. The noise faded. What surprised me most was how little satisfaction I felt from any of it. Control doesn't feel the way people imagine. It isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, solid and unmovable, waiting to be tested. The real shift happened inside me. I stopped replaying the meeting in my head, stopped imagining different responses, stopped wondering if I should have seen it coming sooner. The past loosened its grip. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came to walking away with nothing but a cardboard box and a polite goodbye. How easily that could have been the ending if I'd reacted instead of remembered. They cut me out of the business. They just forgot one thing. I was still standing on the ground it was built on. Time has a strange way of changing what power feels like. In the beginning, owning that building felt like leverage, something solid I could lean on if everything else slipped. But as months turned into years, it became something quieter, responsibility, weight, a reminder that what you hold can shape other people's lives whether you intend it to or not. I learned the names of the tenants upstairs, small firms, one nonprofit, a printing shop that had been there longer than we had. I listened when they complained about the elevator or the heating. I approved repairs without dragging my feet. Not because I wanted gratitude, but because neglect always shows up eventually, and I was done pretending problems didn't exist. The company downstairs adjusted too. Rebecca stopped pushing aggressive growth plans. She focused on stabilizing cash flow, renegotiating supplier contracts, trimming only where it didn't cut into muscle. Thomas stayed visible, but quieter. Less performance, more listening. They stopped talking about expansion and started talking about survival. I watched all of this from a distance that felt deliberate. We still crossed paths occasionally. Weddings, funerals, holidays where everyone pretended not to notice the empty chair where Dad used to sit. Conversations stayed polite, surface level. No one reopened old wounds, but no one covered them up either. They were there, acknowledged without being touched. One evening, after a long day of routine calls and emails, I found myself back at the building after hours. The parking lot was nearly empty. The sign glowed softly against the dark, the same way it always had. I stood there longer than I meant to. This place had been the center of our family for years. Not our home. Something more complicated. A shared purpose that blurred lines until no one could tell where work ended and loyalty began. I unlocked the side door and walked through the quiet halls. The warehouse smelled faintly of cardboard and oil. Familiar, comforting in a way I hadn't expected. For a moment, I could almost hear my father's voice reminding me to double-check the loading dock or keep the lights off where they weren't needed. That was the night I realized something important. I didn't miss the company. I missed being trusted. The betrayal hadn't hurt because of money or titles. It hurt because the people who knew me best had decided I was expendable, that the role I played quietly could be erased without consequence. Owning the building hadn't fixed that. What it had done was force them to acknowledge my existence in a way they couldn't rewrite. Not long after that realization, Rebecca reached out directly. No intermediaries, no lawyers, just a text asking if we could talk. We met at a cafe halfway between our homes. Neutral ground. She looked tired but steadier than I'd seen her in years. Less defensive, more honest. She didn't apologize right away. She talked about pressure, expectations, fear of losing control once Dad was gone. How decisions had started as temporary measures and hardened into something cruel before she noticed. When she finally said she was sorry, it wasn't dramatic. No tears. Just a flat statement that carried more weight because of it. I accepted it. Not because it fixed everything, but because holding on to resentment had started to feel heavier than letting it go. She asked if I ever worried they'd tried to take the building from me somehow. Legal maneuvering, back channels. She said it carefully, like she was afraid of confirming a thought I'd already had. I told her the truth. They could try. Anyone can try anything. But ownership is boringly resilient when it's documented properly. It doesn't care about narratives or family history. It just exists. That was when she smiled faintly. The first real smile I'd seen from her in a long time. I guess Dad knew what he was doing, she said. He did. As the years passed, my role shifted again. I stopped thinking of the building as a tool or a shield. It became an anchor, something that gave structure to my days without consuming them. I pursued other projects, consulting work, small investments, things that felt lighter, chosen rather than inherited. The company remained where it was, smaller, less flashy, more stable. They paid rent. They kept the lights on. They survived. People still ask me sometimes why I didn't take more, why I didn't push harder when I had the upper hand, why I didn't make them feel the same panic I'd felt sitting in that conference room years ago. The answer is simple. I didn't need to. Real power doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It doesn't need witnesses. It just waits. If I'd learned anything from being cut out, it was that endings don't always look like victories. Sometimes they look like boundaries that finally hold. I lost my place in the family business. What I gained was something steadier, control over my own footing, and that turned out to be enough. I didn't realize how final things were until the phone stopped ringing. Not dramatically, not overnight, just slowly, the way habits fade when there's nothing left to feed them. No late-night calls about cash flow, no quick questions that weren't quick at all. No updates disguised as favors. The building stood, the lease held, the distance stayed intact. Life filled in the space. I bought a smaller place closer to the water, nothing flashy. Somewhere quiet enough that I could hear my own thoughts again. I learned which mornings were best for walking and which cafes didn't mind if you sat too long without ordering a second cup. I started saying no more often. It felt strange at first, then natural. Every once in a while, I'd hear news through someone else. A mutual contact mentioning the company had renewed a major client. Another saying they'd let go of half a department to stay afloat. The tone was never gloating or worried, just factual, like talking about the weather. That's when I understood what had really changed. They weren't part of my identity anymore. I ran into Thomas at a charity event about 3 years after everything happened. We recognized each other at the same time. There was no tension, just a brief hesitation, like two people checking whether an old language still worked. We talked about ordinary things, travel, aging knees, how strange it felt to live in a world without our father in it. He didn't mention the building. I didn't mention the company. We didn't need to. Before we parted, he said something I hadn't expected. "You handled it better than I would have." I nodded. That was enough. What people don't tell you about betrayal is that the aftermath isn't explosive. It's quiet. It's made of choices you keep making long after the story stops being interesting to anyone else. Choices about whether you define yourself by what was taken or by what you refuse to lose. For a long time, I thought the deed was the twist, the clever part, the thing that saved me. It wasn't. The real turning point happened in that parking lot, sitting alone in my car after they told me I no longer belonged. When I decided I wouldn't beg, wouldn't rush, wouldn't explain myself to people who had already made up their minds. Everything that followed came from that. I've kept the building. It's worth more now than it was back then, if that matters to anyone keeping score. The company is still there, still using the name, still telling its version of the story to new hires who weren't around when things broke. That's fine. Stories don't change ownership. Documents do. Sometimes I drive past without stopping. Sometimes I park for a minute and watch people come and go. New faces, new routines. The place keeps moving just like it always did. It doesn't remember the arguments or the meetings or the day I carried my life out in a cardboard box. I do, and that's okay. If there's a lesson in all of this, it isn't about revenge. It isn't about being clever or patient or legally prepared, even though all of that mattered. It's about understanding where your leverage actually comes from. Not from shouting, not from threats, from knowing what you own in every sense of the word. They cut me out of the family business because they thought control lived in titles and votes and conference rooms. They never stopped to look at the foundation, the paperwork, the quiet decisions made years earlier by someone who understood me better than they did. By the time they realized, it was already done. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever felt pushed aside by the people who were supposed to have your back, take a second before you react. Look at what you actually have, not what they tell you you're worth, not what they leave you with. What's really yours? And if you want more stories like this, real ones about family, power, and the kind of justice that doesn't need applause, make sure you're subscribed. These aren't fantasies. They're reminders. There's another story coming next, and it starts with a different kind of betrayal. One that looks smaller at first, until the paperwork surfaces. I'll see you there.